All right, folks, last week of the fantasy season. Time for most to start looking ahead to next fantasy season, and we're here to help. Hey, how are you? Jason Horowitz. Glad you could join us on the Chase Fantasy Football Series exclusively here on CBS Sportsline. It's roster trends, and in this edition, a little help on a couple guys to pick up if you're still playing. But for the rest of you, we'll help you do your very early research, and I mean very early 2007 fantasy research. And to help me with all of it, we bring in CBS Sportsline senior fantasy writer Jamey Eisenberg from Miami. And Jamey, for those that are still playing but maybe need a guy or two to help and they're in desperate need, who are a couple of guys to look to pick up?
Well, certainly you got a wide receiver in San Diego named Vincent Jackson who had 2 touchdowns last week. He's the only real receiver outside of Antonio Gates that Phillip Rivers likes to throw to, and he's got a lot of potential and could be a good matchup this week. And then Kurt Warner, I know we talked about in who's hot, who's not, that Kurt Warner's been a disappointment this year, but Kurt Warner actually is coming back in because of Matt Leiner's injury this week and could be a decent replacement if you need a quarterback to play this week because of the weapons that he has around him.
Yeah, he does have great weapons. Of course, we did give Kurt Warner one of the awards as far as the biggest disappointment of the season, but for 1 week, maybe he's a good play if you're absolutely desperate.
Chance to redeem himself.
The rest of this show, let's take a look to 2007 and do some keeper stuff. 3 rookie quarterbacks this year that have played and have all played well. Would you keep any or all of them in Vince Young, Matt Leiner, or Jay Cutler?
Certainly you would. I mean, Vince Young has proven to be a franchise quarterback, could be a franchise quarterback for fantasy users next year because he runs, he throws, and he's only going to get better, especially when they get some receivers around him. Matt Leiner, again, as we talked about with Kurt Warner, he's got a lot of weapons around him. He's going to do well next year, especially once that offensive line gets better. And then Jay Cutler, the Broncos finally found their heir replacement to John Elway, and he's been great. He's only going to get better as well next year, so keep all 3.
Yeah, the playing time that he ended up getting this year has really helped him and will definitely help him for next year as Denver most likely, assuming they beat San Francisco in the playoffs. All right, Jamey, as far as those quarterbacks, where would you put them on keeper rankings ahead of, which quarterbacks would you put them ahead of as far as keeper rankings?
Well, obviously, it depends on how many players you're allowed to keep and what's on your roster right now. But, outside of Peyton Manning and Drew Brees, I think it's sort of wide open because you don't really know what's going to happen next year with Brett Favre. Steve McNair is getting older. The situation in Miami is very, sort of crazy. You don't know what's going to happen next year with them. So Michael Vick may be traded. So those 3 guys, at least they're going to be with their team, and they have a lot of upside. So certainly if you have the opportunity to keep those guys and maybe draft another quarterback, a more solid veteran, maybe like an Eli Manning or one of those type of players, then that can help you next year. But certainly these guys are worth keeping.
Yeah, Carson Palmer also one of those quarterbacks to think about as far as keeping as well. All right, what about some of the other rookies you think about keeping this offseason, Jamey? A lot of running backs this year that came out in the first round and produced. Aside from Reggie Bush, what are some other guys you would think about keeping?
Well, you got to like Joseph Adai in Indianapolis because he's capable of doing what Edgerrin James did, if not better. Dominic Rhodes may or may not be there next year, but Adai should be the #1 back and should continue to do well. Obviously, Maurice Jones-Drew, Fred Taylor is at the end of his career and is dealing again with injuries to end this season. Maurice Jones-Drew has just been phenomenal. Why wouldn't you keep him? I mean, he's scoring touchdowns every week, even with Fred Taylor in there. So certainly he's been great. You got to look at D'Angelo Williams, Leon Washington. Lawrence Maroney of Corey Dillon is not there, and then Marquez Colston has been a great wide receiver, so he also has potential to be kept for fantasy owners as well.
And you guys think so highly of Jones-Drew. We'll get back to that in a little bit at the end of this segment.
We do. We like him a lot.
Yeah, I know you like him a lot down there in Florida. All right, a couple of other things. Let's take a look at some of the other guys that you would think about keeping first time this year that maybe you haven't kept in the past, and we'll take you through this year. Some of the guys new to keep this year, obviously you'd want to keep Brian Westbrook and Frank Gore because they're only going to get better as well. Obviously Drew Brees on that list. You guys in Florida have Bernard Berrien and Brandon Jacobs on there as well, and as we switch to guys not to keep this year, you see why you would keep Brandon Jacobs because Tiki Barber's retirement. And as far as the running back core, well, it's getting older as you take a look at this guys to avoid list. Fred Taylor, as you mentioned, Jamey, and Corey Dillon, and Amon Green as well. All right, I mentioned that you guys really, really like Maurice Jones-Drew. You guys did a mock draft down there at CBS Sportsline in Florida for the first round, 2007 first round mock draft. And let's go through it real quickly, and I want you to explain to me why, after the first 2 picks, you guys did what you did. Obviously, LaDainian Tomlinson and Larry Johnson at the top, and then you see 3 through 6. Running back, and Steven Jackson, Frank Gore, and Sean Alexander, and then Peyton Manning, quarterback. More on that in a second. All right, how about the other half of the first round? This is obviously in a 12-team league. Then you have Brian Westbrook, who has moved up into the first round, along with Willie Parker, guys that you think that Jamey thinks you would keep. Drew Brees also up there. And then at the bottom, a couple of the rookies we've talked about, Maurice Jones-Drew and Reggie Bush. How did those 2 guys climb up to the top, to the first round? I mean, who did you put those guys ahead of?
Well, again, we looked at the receivers that are going to be there next year, and the guys are getting older. Marvin Harrison's getting older. Chad Johnson is getting older, and plus he's got the emerging T.J. Houshmandzadeh, as we talked about, and who's hot, who's not. Torrey Holt is getting older, and Steven Jackson has really become the focal point of that offense. So we really didn't see any receivers that we liked. And then in terms of the running back, it's going to be a lot of changing of the guard next year because, again, Corey Dillon is getting older. Amon Green, you don't know what's going to happen with him. Some other guys that we liked aside from Maurice Jones-Drew was Cedric Benson because of the Thomas Jones situation. So these guys, they just showed so much potential, again, with Maurice Jones-Drew, with Fred Taylor not being there. If he's going to get the ball 30 times a game, he's going to be great because Jack Del Rio likes to run the ball. And Reggie Bush, he's only going to continue to get more involved in the offense. Deuce McAllister's still going to be there, but Bush, in leagues where receptions count, he's going to be phenomenal. And he's really starting to show, as the season has gone on, that he can be so much involved in the passing game. And if he breaks one tackle, two tackles, he's gone to the end zone. So that's a huge advantage for a guy like that. So we like both those guys ahead of some of the established veterans and the upside that they have for next year.
And neither of those guys got as banged up this year because they were splitting carries, unlike Carnell Williams and Ronnie Brown last year, which is... All right, I see your point, Jamey. All right, good stuff out of you as always. And folks, for more on keeper leagues or anything fantasy-wise as the season wraps up, be sure to read everything from Jamey as well as Dave Richard. Jamey, we'll talk to you one last time for Stardom Sit-'em. All right, folks, that'll do it for this edition of Roster Trends on the Chase Fantasy Football Series. But don't forget, one last week, Stardom Sit-'em, Jamey's best bets to help you win in Week 17. Until then, I'm Jason Horowitz. Take care.